Welcome back to the most accurate podcast here at 4for4 Football. As always, I'm your host, John Daigle. Joined today, friend in life, the man who's changing projections around the clock, none other than John Paulson. Paulson, how's it going?
I think that would have applied, friend in life, changing rankings around the clock. It would have applied to our guest as well.
Guest of honor, you mentioned, is, of course, friend in life, one of best friends in life, honestly, and former roommate in life. Of course, he has established the run's own, the great Evan Silva. And I know also, Silva, you have been very busy this time of year.
Yeah, geez. And actually, we're going to jump, I think, right into some injuries that occurred very recently. I'll be interested to hear the adjustments that you guys made with regard to like Terry McLaurin, Jaxon Smith-Njigba, those type of guys. Because those are guys that people are drafting in the top 100 consensus, you know.
Let's get right into it then, because we discuss at the beginning of every show risers and fallers, and those two injuries are most prudent. The two biggest draft weekends on deck for everyone. And let's start with Terry McLaurin, who was previously going as a mid to low end wide receiver 2, but now we are looking at reportedly a 4 to 6 week injury. We don't know the exact extent of the timeline he could miss. But Paulson, so far now, with McLaurin potentially out of the picture, how far are you moving him down, and what are you doing with his surrounding teammates?
Well, maybe you should update the where you're hearing that. I did see Dr. Chow say he thought maybe a 6-week IR stint. I've also seen multiple reports where they are optimistic about him being ready for week 1. So I'm still I'm like a little bit in the fall. I moved him down a little bit. I'm not going to panic. And, you know, I still want him. But until I hear he's going to miss multiple games, I mean, they're calling him day to day. We still have a few weeks until the season starts. So, you know, if he misses week 1 or is, you know, limited week 1, that doesn't affect my love for him or my ranking of him too much. You know, he's one of my primary middle round targets. Love him in the 4th or 5th round. I think he's going to drop now into the 5th round pretty consistently, maybe even lower. And, you know, I think you just have to kind of do this injury research and figure out who you believe and what timeline do you believe? I mean, sometimes the teams lie, as you both know. Sometimes they're just rosy and optimistic. Sometimes the doctors are wrong. It's not like these doctors are always right about these injuries. So, you know, multiple reports came out quickly that x-rays were negative. They were excited or thinking that it was pretty positive that he was going to be available for week 1, or at least optimistic. So that's what I'm going off of right now until I hear it differently.
Last night in a 14-team league, Silva, so a little bit of adjustment there. I will say McLaurin fell to the Michael Pittman, Mike Evans tier of wide receivers, which is basically 2 rounds deeper. And that's when I took him as my wide receiver 5, saying I can actually just pad for his starts at the beginning of the year if he were to miss time. And so that's how far I would let him fall and then take him with ease, honestly. But what adjustments are you making? Because I know your top 150 on establishedrun.com are now updated for it.
Yeah, well, I didn't actually make any updates because I'm in the same boat as Paulson, and I have not moved him down yet because I was going off of that initial expectation that he was day-to-day and that he still had a chance to be ready for week 1. Now we have, you know, no disrespect, but Twitter doctors coming out and saying that it could be worse than what we were hearing initially. So I'm like literally in lockstep with Paulson. I guess I'm in the fog. I'm going to go look at the rankings again and see if I can move him down, if it's justifiable to move him down. But I'm still going off the initial day-to-day projection.
Let me ask you this then, Paulson. What did you do with Jahan Dotson? Because I think that's going to be a big riser for everyone. And initially, I was high on him, but I wasn't high on him as consensus because he did get there on touchdowns last year. 7 touchdowns on 35 receptions. It was slightly concerning for me. But we do know, at least in those last 5 starts when he returned from injury, he did out-target Terry McLaurin, 35 to 34. So there is a range of outcomes there where he leads the entire team in target share on the full year.
Yeah, there's a couple of things now going on with Dotson because the McLaurin injury might boost him at the start of the season. Sam Howell is looking really good. So I think we're going from, everybody's worried about Howell to now, he might provide at least league average quarterback play, which would be better than what McLaurin and Dotson, have seen. Certainly McLaurin has been through the ringer when it comes to his quarterback play. But Dotson is just one of these guys that has been flying under the radar. I think he's going to get steamed a little bit here. I did move him up. I did move McLaurin down a little bit to 19. I think I had him at 15 or 16 before that. And that moved Dotson up from maybe 35 to 30. If you look at Dotson's season, he's flying under the radar, I think, because of, that injury that he had, but he was the fantasy wide receiver 21 through the first 4 weeks prior to injury. 152 yards and 4 touchdowns with 12 catches. He returned in week 10. He didn't get up to starter snaps until week 13. And at that point, John, you alluded to it. He rattled off 5 for 54 and a touchdown, 4 for 105 and a touchdown, 6 for 76 and a touchdown, 3 for 37, and then 3 for 72. If those injury games are removed, he averaged about 12.1 fantasy points per game, about 55 yards receiving. He did average 0.78 touchdowns per game, which you also alluded to, that he's being a little bit touchdown heavy. Mm-hmm. But, 55 yards a game from a rookie in his healthy games is really impressive. He obviously good route runner. He did very well over at Matt Harmon's reception perception charting. I think he is a really solid, upside pick there in maybe the 7th round if you can get him there.
I know you have high stakes drafts coming up, Silva. I've already done 2 main events. You have some on deck. Mm-hmm. And right now in FFPC $2,000 12-team leagues, Jahan Dotson's being drafted at the beginning of the 8th round. His blockers, like if we're trying to move him up, are Mike Evans, George Pickens at the beginning of the 7th round. If you want to go a little bit further than that, Brandon Ayuk in the mid 6th round. Is that where you prefer to push Dotson now, or do you want to keep him around the 7-round range?
Yeah, I mean, if we're going to react to the Twitter doctors painting a more difficult return timetable for Terry McLaurin, while still leaning on the initial projection of day-to-day has a chance to be ready for week 1, maybe the smart reaction is to maybe tick McLaurin down a little bit and then react by moving Jahan Dotson up, because at least for me, I have not been super high on Jahan Dotson. Mm-hmm. But as you mentioned, Sam Howell has played really well for the 2nd straight preseason. And every time that we've seen him, he looks like an NFL quarterback. My thing for Jahan Dotson, I did not love him coming out of college. He wasn't a stellar athlete. He's, on the smaller side, but you're right. He did play well as a rookie, with the somewhat exception of that, that astronomical TD rate. And we had Matt Harmon on the show, and his charting of Jahan Dotson was really strong, as Paulson mentioned as well. So I think that's probably what I'm going to do. I'm going to go make these changes probably right after this show, tick Terry McLaurin down a little bit, move Jahan Dotson up into a range where, my readers are going to have a chance to get him. Because right now I have him like wide receiver 41 or something like that. And you're not getting him at that kind of a ranking.
And with your partner, Adam Levitan, also being a Penn State alum, just don't tell him your ranking on Jahan Dotson. The second injury we need to discuss ahead of 12-team drafts for everyone this weekend is the one to Jaxon Smith-Njigba, because we're also hearing some shady timelines. Pete Carroll has reportedly said 3 to 4 weeks. What that means for Pete Carroll with his rose-colored glasses on, who the hell knows? The way I've been viewing it is that the Seahawks bye is that first segment of the year. It's week 5. And so if we're looking at Jaxon Smith-Njigba being brought along slowly or missing the first couple of games, why wouldn't the team just put him on the 4-week pup list and bring him back week 6? So that's going to be my personal outlook on it. But Paulson, you have already been high on Lockett throughout the year. I know Silva's high on Metcalf. So how are you now changing the projections for this situation?
And this is one where I haven't done anything yet. I'm looking at it. I have Jaxon Smith-Njigba at 39. So I've been low on him relative to ADP. I just think Tyler Lockett is the best receiver there. He is getting a tad old, but I'm not to a point where I'm worried about it. His metrics were phenomenal last year: open score, reception perception, all that stuff. So I have Lockett ahead of Metcalf. I'm sure I'm in the vast minority of analysts that Metcalf is one of my guys I'm just not getting any of because of his ADP. He's just gone too early. I like him, but I just don't like him, around 2 rounds, 3 rounds ahead of Lockett. Mm-hmm. So I haven't done anything yet because I don't want to get too crazy on Lockett. I I think his ADP is now going to rise to where you're no longer getting him as a value. I mean, Connor Allen and I just got him at 603 in a main event draft. Very happy to get him there. I think now you're going to see him go near that 4 or 5 turn. And I would certainly do that still because I've got him ranked ahead of some of those guys going in the 5th round. But I haven't made any big adjustments yet because where I had Jaxon Smith-Njigba was already fairly low. If he does miss a game or two, I don't think it affects his outlook too drastically. If he does go onto a 4-game IR, then certainly you're going to have to take that into account. He did look good in the preseason. But I had him to a point. I had him ranked at a point where, I'm looking at it now. Michael Thomas, Brandon Cooks, Zay Flowers, those guys are right below him. I'm starting to think about who I might take over him if you're assuming maybe a 2 to 4 week absence.
And Lockett being ahead of Metcalf in your rankings does not mean you're drafting them as such. That just means be on the lookout because, as you said, their ADP was 3 to 4 rounds apart. Now, though, Silva, I would imagine we're bringing Lockett closer to Metcalf and probably keeping Metcalf the same as a 2nd, 3rd round turn player.
Yeah, see, I've been really high on DK Metcalf in that wide receiver 12 to wide receiver 14 range, but I've also been super high on Tyler Lockett in like the wide receiver 18 range. I mean, Tyler Lockett is like almost every year one of my highest drafted wide receivers, and that has not changed this year. I mean, he falls to the 6th round, and I think he's like a 3rd or 4th round player. So, I mean, I just get so much of him. I don't think I'm going to move him up off of this because I like Paulson, was already kind of low on Jaxon Smith-Njigba. I had him as the 88th overall player. And I did tick him down last night, like 5 spots to 93, while still waiting on more information. I think that, I have no idea what Pete Carroll means by 3 to 4 weeks. My assumption would be that it would mean, hey, we're not going to have him for 3 or 4 weeks from yesterday when Pete Carroll said that. And then therefore Pete Carroll thinks that he could be back. That would be reasonable to expect Jaxon Smith-Njigba to be back like no later than week 3. Mm-hmm. So I'm kind of putting the Pete Carroll stuff to the side right now. I like your analysis that it makes all the sense in the world for Jaxon Smith-Njigba to sit out until after that week 5 bye, and then we don't have him for the first 5 weeks of the season. I mean, at that point, I think that I probably got to move him down to pick 100 or 110, maybe even.
Could I add something? Yeah. He's like where I have him ranked. He's going in this weird area. I don't know if you guys have seen it as well. Like maybe the end of the 8th round. It gets really weird at receiver where you might have guys that you are going in the 13th round or that maybe your next guy ranked. So I feel like I don't like anybody after some of these guys go off. So I'm a little reluctant to maybe move him below Zay. I could go Zay Flowers and then you're getting into Juju Smith-Schuster, Zay Jones for me. And these are guys you can get later, Romeo Dobbs, so like
Jaxon Smith-Njigba has a chance to be a fantasy starter at some point. Those guys kind of, that's not really, those are like wide receiver 5s, right?
I think that's when it comes down to how you've drafted to that point. So if we're all moving JSN to that range of drafts, like this weekend, I had a 12-team super flex and it got to like the 14th round and Juju was still on the board, but also I had 5 receivers and Tank Bigsby was there. And so I'm not saying Tank Bigsby will outscore Juju, but I was looking for ceiling. I didn't care about Juju's high floor. And so I think like moving JS into that range then tells you if you still have room on your bench to just and you have those starts that we think he's going to miss protected, I still don't mind just stashing him and drafting him there as a high ceiling, hopefully hitting in the second half of the season. Personally. And either way, Silva, I think that also tells us we're high on Geno Smith still. That's really the key here is that Geno Smith is going to ball this year.
Yeah. Where are you at on Geno, Paulson?
I have him at 9.
Yeah.
I mean, he's my primary late round target. Building draft strategies around him if I want to go late round. I mean, I think there is some appeal to grabbing an early guy, but you look at some of these ADPs, different formats, and you can get Geno, 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th round. That's really appealing to me because I think he's got a great chance to repeat his top 6 finish from last year.
Okay. Reminder. You can go to underdog.com and adjust for all these projection and ranking changes today. We are here, though, to talk about our fades for the two biggest upcoming draft weekends of the year. And as the guest of honor, Silva, I would love to hear your first player that you are fading in all your drafts.
So I get cold feet on this one. I get cold feet on fades in general very often because, this is like a time for optimism. You can paint a rosy picture for almost any player in the NFL, and you can find a positive opinion on almost any player in the NFL at this time of year. And then the games start and things get a lot harder then.
You fade everyone.
Right. Yeah, right. Well, by the end of the season, only 25 players really matter in fantasy. Right now it feels like 200 players have a chance to matter. I'm going to go with Breece Hall, and he's coming off a torn ACL and torn left meniscus late last October. I think that Rich Cimini, longtime Jets beat writer, reported that the reason that the Jets signed Dalvin Cook was to be their lead back early in the season, and they're going to ease Breece Hall in. I do think that Breece Hall will be a bigger factor as the season progresses, and might be one of those 25 players that really, really matter at the end of the season. But for a guy who people are still taking, it's almost like people have take lock. Like, people are still taking him in the 4th and 5th and early 5th rounds. Like, when I draft a player there, I want to have them be startable for the first month of the season. Like, I want to start 3-1. I want to start 4-0. I don't want to have, a bunch of players I can't freaking use on my fantasy roster early in the season. And again, when I'm drafting in that range, I need that from my player. The Jets gave Dalvin Cook starter money. Okay. They flirted with Jahmyr Gibbs in the draft. They flirted with Jamal Williams in free agency. They drafted Izzy Abinakanda out of Pitt. So just the vibes that they're giving off, the signals that they're giving off, I think reflect the way that they're going to ease Breece Hall in. Breece Hall is running in a straight line very fast right now, but he's not consistently making cuts out there on the field. And to me, he looks like a player who's going to be used in spot duty. That's like fully what I expect for the first 5 or 6 weeks of the season. So I'm not drafting him where he's going right now in drafts.
Paulson, you've had an extra week to think on this since the last time we talked about rankings changes. So what are your thoughts now on where Breece Hall should be going?
Yeah, it's tough. I was in that aforementioned main event draft. We were drafting at 5'10". Breece Hall was on the board. We passed on him for Drake London. We already had 3 running backs on the roster. So that was our justification for that, or that was the reasoning. It was really weird to see Hall there. I was not expecting it. I'm looking at his ADP in the main event now, 502. So Evans right on with this, 4 or 5 turn is where he's still going. If you're drafting for the last half of the season, I can see it. If you're drafting your 3rd running back, I could see it if you're trying to do a running back heavy sort of plan. But if you're going to be counting on him in September to win games for you, that seems really dicey. On the other hand, it was weird because they signed Dalvin Cook and he's supposed to be healthy. Hall's supposed to be on the pup. And then the next thing you know, Hall's off the pup and Cook's on the pup with his shoulder. Like, he's had this shoulder injury,
Perfect.
We've been worried about it for years. So, there's no guarantee that Dalvin Cook is even playing in October. We'll see. In terms of just getting hit on that shoulder once or twice and all of a sudden he's out. So it's tough. Like, I think in the 5th round, it's fair. I think 6th round, you start getting, there's some upside, points you could make, but there are other players that are going in that range that are really interesting, like Alexander Madison or Damian Pierce, who's kind of trending up now because of his preseason snaps. So, there's no reason to run out there and grab Hall when you can get some other big touchbacks in that range.
And for me, Silva, this 4 to 6 week span that the Jets are, and I believe they're speaking the truth, trying to bring Breece Hall along slowly. I just don't know, even with one of the league's best defenses, if that even carries over. I don't know how often they'll be able to even run the ball because they come out the gates with the Bills, Cowboys, Patriots, Chiefs, Broncos on the road, and the Eagles. It's literally the league's toughest schedule before their bye through week 6. And so it just seems like an uphill battle for Dalvin Cook as well. Not to mention the Twitter doctors, at least in terms of Breece Hall's injury. We'll see how the workload shakes out. But the Twitter doctors have said, usually, historically, the players that bounce back in year 1 post-torn ACL are the athletes who earn targets. And Breece Hall was a 96th percentile athlete who had a 12.7% target share as a rookie and led all running backs with 21 air yards per game because he also earned deep shots out of the backfield. And so whenever we're moving him down, it's not even the workload. I look at the range of players that both of you mentioned. I look at Travis Etienne and Miles Sanders, and as much as I love Dameon Pierce, he's playing with a rookie mobile quarterback. That alone is 2 red flags I just mentioned. And so if that's the case, I still just don't mind taking Breece Hall at the end of the 5th and 6th round.
And I think that that's fair. And I think that we all are going to, maybe fall in different places and conundrum situations like this, because it's just not an easy situation to figure out. So I understand taking a stand really either way. It's just, I think I'm taking this particular stand because I don't think that Breece Hall has full workloads within his range of outcomes, at least not for the first month or so of the season.
And I would like to just underline that there's really, and maybe Evan agrees with this or maybe he doesn't, but he's not probably marking him off completely. If Breece Hall's there in the 7th round,
right,
Evan might take a shot at him. I certainly would. So
I might take him in the late 5th.
Yeah, it's bad ADPs. These are do not drafts at their current ADPs is what we're looking at. So it's not so much a bad player or a bad upside. It's the ADP is the problem.
We will end the Breece Hall discussion on this, Silva, because I think it is a prudent question for everyone drafting this weekend because it's a tier break. Would you take Najee Harris over Breece Hall?
Right now I have Najee Harris ranked above Breece Hall.
Okay.
I probably would, although I don't think that Najee Harris's preseason has been especially promising with Jalen Warren taking a ton of snaps. So I might not take either of those guys, And
maybe that's why the answer is just draft a receiver in that range instead.
Yeah.
Paulson, your first fade.
I'm going to fade a tier of quarterbacks, and we alluded to it earlier. Really it starts with Deshaun Watson. I don't get the ADP for him. I think if you're projecting his history as a fantasy quarterback, sure, but what we saw last year was bad. The preseason reports have been really spotty. I don't know if you guys saw the last week or so. There just hasn't been many positive plays in the Cleveland passing game in camp, apparently. So Deshaun Watson, Tua Tagovailoa, due to the concussion thing, scares me a little bit. I think I feel better about him in a redraft where you get out of him as opposed to a best ball where you're kind of stuck with him. Dak Prescott, Kirk Cousins, maybe Aaron Rodgers, that tier of quarterbacks, I'm kind of fading them all. I might pull the trigger on Rodgers if he falls, but I would rather draft a Geno Smith, an Anthony Richardson, a Daniel Jones. I have those guys ranked ahead of that tier. So I'm basically avoiding the QB9 to QB12 range right now in ADP.
I like where your head's at, but I don't want you to put Deshaun Watson in that tier because, again, yes, the reports have been very bad out of camp, but even last year, at least we got 6 carries per game from the quarterback position. We saw him have 5 dropbacks in the first week of preseason, and he had 3 carries within those 5 dropbacks. And also last year, 14.3 points per game, a career low. That was the first time for his entire career he averaged less than 20. I genuinely think it's a situation where you just suck it up and say he cannot be that bad with a career low and touchdown rate again. And so I still think he should be in the Trevor Lawrence tier. Your thoughts, Silva?
I have him in the Trevor Lawrence tier.
Yeah.
I have him at I came out hot on him, and I actually moved him down a tier like 2 days ago. I still have him quarterback 8. I have him actually in front of Trevor Lawrence just because of that rushing upside. At the same time, these reports are concerning. We have not seen the dude play quality football in a long time. So this is another situation where if you're going to be bearish on Deshaun Watson, I get it. I'm probably a little bullish on him. I've drafted a decent amount of him as well because of where he goes and his theoretical upside. But I mean, I really get both sides of this argument.
I am coming out the gates hot because I don't think Saquon Barkley is a first-round player. I don't think that does justice to Nick Chubb, A.J. Brown, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and Tony Pollard, all who deserve the last 4 spots of the first round. What I think is happening is that people who missed out on Saquon Barkley's league-winning second-round ADP last year for recency bias are now chasing it, even though that was the first time in his career he was healthy for a full season. That was a career-high target share and leading the Giants in targets, and we don't think that team high in targets is going to happen again, given all of the options they added, whether it be a full offseason to integrate Isaiah Hodgins, who they added in week 9, or Darren Waller, who is glowing out of every report in camp. So I want to take Saquon Barkley out of the first round and instead push those players I mentioned up, Paulson.
Sure. I mean, I have Pollard ahead of him, half PPR. I have Derrick Henry ahead of him. I have Bijan Robinson ahead of him, Nick Chubb, some of the guys you mentioned. I think that's reasonable. He's not going to be the wide receiver 1 in the passing game like he kind of was last year. I do think that he's a solid very solid second round pick. I mean, I think he's going to be the bell cow and all that. You're just saying don't use one of your last couple picks in the first round on him. Instead, go with one of these other guys, right?
Correct. I don't think he has the ceiling of the players I mentioned at the end. And usually in home leagues, it's Amon-Ra and Tony Pollard who get left out.
What do you think,
that's
Evan?
Wrong.
I just recently moved Tony Pollard ahead of him. Yep. I've got him like neck and neck with Nick Chubb right now because Saquon Barkley still, I think, can catch 60 passes. Nick Chubb might catch 30 this year, but that would be like a lot for him. Some of my optimism stems from there's just really weak competition for the workload with the Giants, and I believe the Giants should be better than they were last year. So I think as a team, from a team standpoint, and I mean Saquon Barkley is just his workload is so secure. I've had him hovering in that 11 to 15 range overall throughout the early draft process. And I'm probably going to keep him in there, but probably toward the back end. So actually, I probably would agree with you. I do not want to take him late in the first round. If I'm going to take him, it's probably going to be early to mid second round.
It is not a hard fade because I do think the mid to early second round is just fine. But if we are drawing hard lines in the sand for everyone to know what to do at the back end, Saquon Barkley does not make my first round at all. Silva, your next fade.
So this is another one, really talented young player, Javonte Williams, and the reports on him have been pretty positive. We saw him play in the second preseason game. I would fully expect him to be available for week 1. Still, coming off an ACL, LCL, and PCL tear last October. And I think that even in a best-case scenario, he is going to share time with Samaje Perine, who is one of these players that is a jack of many trades and probably master of none, but is also a player that the Broncos invested in. Specifically, the new coaching staff targeted him to go get him. And he's a player that, he's one of these like Jamal Williams type players who coaches trust, and therefore he's going to end up playing a lot. I mean, he played over Joe Mixon in many passing situations last year, and I think that that's going to be the case this year. I just think that in a best case scenario, Javonte Williams is going to be a committee back in a suspect offense, the results of which are very much remain to be seen because, coming up with Russell Wilson coming off all those struggles from last season.
And Williams did catch 4 or 5 targets in his first preseason appearance. You mentioned this past week. I've really been struggling with this one, Paulson. I try to back up as a veteran of therapy and say, is this me or is this the situation I'm in? And I don't know if I'm being hard-headed with Javonte because I think we should be looking at the long-term outlook, as Silva mentioned. Like we should be looking at, you have to be historically an anomaly to be right about bouncing back miraculously from this PCL, torn ACL tear. Like players just don't come back and perform well from it. But here Javonte Williams is out of nowhere somehow on the field. And so I just don't know what to do with it.
Yeah, I think the bull case is Sean Payton fixes this offense. Javonte Williams is healthy enough to, take a 60-40 workload, into the back half of the season, and maybe he finishes as a mid-range RB2. And the bear case on it is that he's in a timeshare, a la Alvin Kamara, Mark Ingram were in New Orleans, and the offense isn't nearly as good as it was in New Orleans. And so now you've got a guy playing half the snaps, seeing maybe 12 to 15 touches a game, sharing time with P. Ryan, and he's probably going to be an RB3 in that regard. So there's a lot of question marks here. I have him at 27 right now. I'm looking at the guys ahead of him, James Conner, who this Arizona team terrifies me this year. J.K. Dobbins, James Cook ahead of him. And behind him, right behind him, Khalil Herbert, Isaiah Pacheco, Alvin Kamara. So, that's where I'm kind of comfortable with him. His ADP is 24, so he's probably going to go off the board a little bit before I'm willing to take him. What do you think, Evan?
Yeah, I would generally agree with that. Yes.
Every time I look up when he's drafted in 12-team leagues, all I know is I'm shocked. I just can't wrap my head around the ADP, so that probably means, right or wrong, I'm just going to be missing out throughout the offseason. Paulson, your next fade.
My next fade. Guys, what do we think about Jonathan Taylor's situation?
He's on my list too. So.
Yeah,
let's talk about it.
I just moved him down as we were discussing this because I was like, oh, where do I have Taylor? Okay, that's too high. Good player. There are some concerns heading into this offseason with the new quarterback there, Richardson, probably going to steal some goal line carries. How much is he going to throw to Taylor? Probably not very much. So, where does that leave Taylor? Is his offense going to be bad? And then on top of it, he's injured, or maybe he's injured. And then on top of that, he wants a trade. So things could work out well for him if he's actually healthy and not really injured and ends up with the Dolphins or something. Like that would be, a good situation for him. But I'm just letting somebody else take that sort of risk in the third round. He's going near that 2-3 turn still. And I just don't want any part of it. I'm going to let somebody else have that headache.
And that's just it, Silver. Regardless of where he's traded, given the reported back injury, like we don't know all the red flags there. Where are you moving him? Like, where would you be willing to draft him when he falls?
Well, I get like random questions like, well, if Jonathan Taylor falls to the fourth round, the fourth, fifth turn, like I got to take him, right? And I would say definitely.
Yeah.
I also am still optimistic that the Colts are going to give him some sort of a pay raise to make him happy, and he's going to go out there and maybe play for $5 million this year, and it's fully guaranteed and all that, just to make him happy, and then he walks after this season. I still think that is actually the likeliest end game. A lot of my concerns stem from the offensive environment, though, in Indianapolis. He's never been a big pass catcher, and Anthony Richardson had an extremely low throw rate to running backs in college. And I just think that the way that they want to play the Colts is to I think they're going to want to run the crap out of the ball right behind Quentin Nelson. So, and that theoretically could be good for Jonathan Taylor to get a lot of carries. I expect him to get a lot of carries as long as he's out there, but I also think that the Colts could be pretty bad this year. I think that there's going to be a lot of ups and downs, and probably more downs with Anthony Richardson at quarterback. I don't think the Colts are going to win a lot of games, and I don't think Jonathan Taylor is going to compensate by catching a lot of passes. That's just not ever something that he's done a lot of. So I have like legitimate on-field concerns about Jonathan Taylor. Also, it seems like he's still not over this ankle injury for last year. Maybe that's part of like a holdout situation. But he kept aggravating that high ankle sprain last year, and he's done nothing to prove that he's past that injury.
All with a rookie and mobile quarterback,
right?
Which has not fared well historically for running backs. So I agree with you. Even if health-wise all was fine, I honestly still had him to start the year at the end of the second round. And usually he just doesn't go there, even in home leagues. So I think he's fine, as you said. If he dips, sure, but it takes a massive dip to get confident in that ADP. Paulson has heard this rant already, Silva. So you're just going to be my personal guest at dinner right now. But I think it's wrong to extrapolate TJ Hawkinson's volume with the Vikings. One, because that was an offense without Jordan Addison. So we're already doing it incorrectly. Two, he averaged fewer fantasy points per game with the Vikings than he did with the Lions. And three, as the third tight end off the board in drafts right now, the fact is he still wasn't a ceiling player with Minnesota. He had one top 5 finish with Minnesota, and he had one top 5 finish with the Lions. And now he's being jammed up the boards for all of these reasons that don't make any sense whatsoever. And so given that entire environment, I think he's one of the easier players to fade inside the top 60 at any position.
I did a podcast with JJ Zacharyson, and he was down on TJ Hockenson as well. So, I mean, that's two voices that I respect being down on. I mean, I have TJ Hockenson as the number 3, but I mean, he's not anywhere near the tier with Travis Kelce, obviously. And I have him in the same tier as Mark Andrews, but he's still way down the board from Mark Andrews. I can't even remember drafting. And I've done like 35 drafts. I don't think I've taken TJ Hockenson once, even though I have him as the tight end 3. So I guess I would lean toward siding with you, but I mean, he's not a player that, he's not a player that I've been drafting.
And Paulson, what we're seeing now in high stakes drafts too is Darren Waller's inching closer. Darren Waller's become the tight end 4 in main event drafts, and he's just getting so much closer to that 3rd, 4th round TJ Hockenson range.
Yeah, and Hockenson is dealing with some sort of balance issue with he had like some kind of ear infection as well, which is sort of, I think, playing into a little bit maybe his ADP falling. But I agree and disagree kind of with your points. Adam Thielen vacated 109 targets, I think it is. I think Addison can slide into that and not impact Hockenson a whole lot. He did score more fantasy points with the Lions. I think that, he had some touchdowns there, but his targets went from 6.1 with Detroit to 8.6 with Minnesota. It's hard to find that sort of usage at the position. I think, when I see him going in the 4th or 5th round of PPR leagues, I think that's a very fair price if you want to have one of these guys that is a top option for his team. I don't know that Jordan Addison is going to come in and affect him too much. And, you mentioned that he was only top 5 once after the trade. Is that correct, John?
Correct. Yeah.
I mean, he was the tight end 3 from week 9 to week 18. That included a very quiet week 18. I think he might've been, if you exclude week 18, which doesn't matter, I don't even look at it usually. He was the tight end 2. Now, there's a huge difference between him and Travis Kelce. I think you guys would probably agree. He's not as talented as maybe Kelce or Kittle, or even maybe who's the guy from Philly? Goddard, Mark Andrews. I think they're better tight ends in terms of receiving. But Hockenson's pretty solid. I mean, I wouldn't fade him at his ADP.
Silva, your final fade.
My final fade is going to be, oh God, you guys are going to hate this one.
Let's hear it.
Because everyone hates this one. Bijan Robinson.
Ooh.
Yeah, I have Bijan Robinson as these guys are always hovering around, but it's like the 15 to 17 range. And I think that, first of all, I don't know how good the Falcons are going to be. Adam Levitan thinks the Falcons are win the friggin' Super Bowl. But I don't know how good is Desmond Ridder. I have no idea. I can absolutely see a scenario where Arthur Smith messes with all of us and is, I think Tyler Algier is a great late round pick. Mm-hmm. I mean, I could see a scenario where Tyler Algier gets 150 carries. I could see although Bijan Robinson is a really good receiving back, I could see a scenario where the Falcons just aren't throwing at all almost. And he winds up when he is targeted, he's highly efficient, but he just doesn't get that many targets. I could see a scenario where Cordero Patterson, although he is injured right now, is back by like week 2 or week 3 and is picking up, 5, 6, 7 touches per game. And I mean, that and winds up being a 3-man backfield on a bad team. So look, I love Bijan Robinson, the number 8 overall pick in the draft. I think that he's going to be a really good and efficient player. But I cannot take him where he's going, which right now I believe his ADP is at like number 9 overall.
This sounds like my Saquon Barkley argument. You're basically just trying to push that player out of the first round. And it's very volatile, Paulson, because we generally just don't know. I think Levitan's point is probably because their schedule is just so damn easy. And even like, as much as we hate Arthur Smith for fantasy, he's a damn good play caller. Like last year, the Falcons faced the highest rate of 8-man boxes, and their running back still collectively led the league in yards per carry. He just knows what he's doing, despite like using all these different guys. So Paulson, really though, I'd like to hear your thoughts on Bijan, but also, like Silva said, it leads to Algier being a value and elite contingency option at worst.
When I say we, Connor Allen and I in this aforementioned main event league had the 10th pick, and we took Nick Chubb over Bijan Robinson. Bijan almost made it to us at 203. That would have created a dilemma. We ended up with AJ Brown there in the second. So Bijan, I got a little bit spooked by all the Algier talk from Arthur Smith. And I'll just go ahead and say that Kyle Pitts was one of my fades, just because I don't trust that he's going to be on the field enough in a full-time receiving role to merit his ADP. So I think he's a fantastic player. The usage might not be there. So that's kind of the same question with Bijan. I mean, as number 8 pick in the 2023 draft, he's one of 7 running backs since 2010 to be drafted inside the top 10 as rookies. Those other 6 backs averaged 296 touches for 1,500 total yards and 11.7 touchdowns. So now I think I'll pose the question to you. If we knew that he was going to get 300 touches, would we feel a lot better about his ADP, or is that what you would need to sort of support this ADP?
I just worry because the way he's being used in both camp and preseason games right now as more of a receiver, that's great. He has a great ceiling. But again, like Falcons running back 2, weekly RB2 last year, still averaged 10 touches per game. And Tyler Algier literally led the league in rushing over the final month of the season. Like he's also very good. And so it just seems like a situation where why would they put Bijan at risk, even with the high draft capital, and keep Algier off the field altogether? So I still think Bijan is a 300 to 320 touch guy. He could easily reach top 5 running back in points per game on those touches because he's so damn good. But there's so much volatility there. I do agree. It's not as safe, I don't think, as everyone assumes. Silva. It sounds like we're all just talking to each other in circles with Bijan.
Yeah. I mean, I think that people just think that he's an absolute lock to crush. And, people were taking him in the top 6 earlier in the offseason.
Yeah.
I think his ADP has come down a little, like just a little bit, to where, again, I think he's number 9 or number 10 overall, depending on where you look. But look, I would definitely take him in the second round. I do not have him in the first round.
Regardless of your opinion.
I mean, look, at the end of the day, I would say like maybe the top 24 players overall in fantasy are all really good picks. Mm-hmm. I mean, they're really good picks. And we're trying to nitpick and just create little divides at the top of the board to determine who we personally are going to select there. And so I don't think it's as cut and dry. I think Bijan could, you could take him as high as number 6 overall, I suppose. But I also think that you could take him at number 16, and there are fair arguments for both sides of that coin.
Speaking of little divides, I'll go to my final one in DJ Moore, because last year, career high 7 touchdowns, but it happened with a career low in yards per route run, 34th among all wide receivers. And less than double-digit fantasy points per game, 9.9, which was a 4-year low for him. He's never recorded a 30% target share in his entire career. And now he's going to this offense that we logically think will pass more by default. Like the Bears' 22.2 pass attempts per game last year was the lowest since the 1979 Chiefs. You would think they have to pass more per game. But even then, what I think is what's happening with DJ Moore being drafted as a low-end wide receiver 2 is that he's being dragged along just for Justin Fields' ADP, when Justin Fields doesn't need any wide receiver to get there. On those historically low pass attempts per game, he still finishes the QB6 in points per game. So I don't even need to stack Justin Fields at all if I draft him. So for me, in that range around Christian Watson, Deontay Johnson, Drake London, even Tyler Lockett, like to me, DJ Moore is a fade. Paulson.
Yeah, and he was actually going to be my last. I don't know if I was getting one more, but he was going to be my last.
Rope it all in together. Great.
As well. So I have him at wide receiver 30. He's going off the board wide receiver 20. So it's fair to say I don't have any DJ Moore this year. And it's sad because he's a player I really like. And I drafted a lot of him in Carolina. But when you do top-down projections, there's just some of these situations where you just can't get the player, even if you wanted to, get them to their ADP. Just looking at what's logically going to happen with the Bears, yes, they are probably going to throw more. They're signaling that they're going to throw more, but this is not a AJ Brown to the Eagles. This is not a Stephon Diggs to the Bills type situation where we have an elite top 10, top 5 type receiver joining an offense. This is a top 15, top 20 type receiver joining the Bears. We have a quarterback who objectively was bad at passing the ball last year. And I'm just not sold that he's going to make this giant leap this year. He could, but not enough to that I'm going to, go and invest in his number 1 receiver. I just don't think that the volume nor Fields' accuracy and ability to move the ball downfield is going to be enough to support a wide receiver 20 for DJ Moore. Thoughts
on DJ Moore, Silva?
I am more optimistic than you, but I completely understand that especially from a stat projection standpoint, like, Leone is our stat projection guy. And I mean, he's like, what are you talking about, Silva? He can't make the math work. The math is really tough to get DJ Moore to be like, an upside wide receiver 2 that has a chance to finish as a low end wide receiver 1, which is what you want from your wide receiver 2 picks. At the same time, like DJ Moore is 25 years old. I think that Justin Fields will take a leap as a passer. That's kind of, a faith-based prediction. I get it. The math isn't going to work. DJ Moore is not going to be a 130-plus target player. Mm-hmm. I think he's going to be 105 to 120. I'd love it if he could get up to 120. But I mean, I believe in him as a player, and I believe that Justin Fields as a passer. Coming out of Ohio State, he was supposed to be like a pocket passer. And now they've built up the offensive line to it. And look, he's a little bit of a slow processor. He doesn't always get the ball out as fast as he needs to. But I think that they've built up the offensive line enough to the point where he's going to get extra time to throw this year. And DJ Moore is going to have some big games. And I also think he's going to have some games where he goes like 3 for 31 on 4 targets. So I'm kind of willing to live with that because I believe in the talent of both players, but there's absolutely going to be weekly volatility, and the math, you can't make the math work on DJ Moore being that high upside wide receiver 2.
Listen, you've been living under a rock if you haven't heard of Establish the Run. But Silva, tell everyone where they can find the rest of your work.
At Establish the Run on Twitter and establishtherun.com on the interwebs. Guys, thanks so much for having me, Paulson. It had been a little while since we've talked, so it was cool to be on with you. Diego, we talk all the time. Too much, probably.
Yep.
But yeah, let's kick some ass this season, though.
Promo code YouTube for 25% off at 4for4.com. Paulson, what else do you have on the site for everyone to close the show?
Corporate is demanding that I get week 1 projections up. I hate doing it 3 weeks in front of week 1, but I'm doing my best here to get the projections up so all the DFS heads can start crunching numbers and looking at salaries and everything. So that's what I'm working on right now. And I believe I have a targets article that is also due soon. So those would be my 2 tasks the rest of this week.
Yeah, corporate is on my ass too right now about a bunch
It's corporate
of stuff,
time of year. Lots of phone calls in the background. This is where they step up and then go away for the next 6 months.
They're like, why haven't you moved McLaurin's ranking yet? And I'm like, because he's supposed to be day to day. What do you mean?
14-team mock draft, not on audio, but on the YouTube channel for everyone from last night if you want to check that out. Until our next bonus episode coming up Thursday afternoon, remember, be a little bit kinder than what's required. We'll see you next time.